Hello and welcome to Tales for Life. In each episode of this podcast, we'll explore a folk or fairy tale from a different culture or region and discover the life lessons, values, and morals they offer that we can use today. Join me on the journey through the magical and meaningful world of folk and fairy tales. Hello and welcome to another episode of Tales for Life, the podcast that journeys through life one tale at a time. Today's episode is another good reminder for us that we don't need millions of dollars or fancy titles to be wealthy. It's titled, True Wealth Comes from What You Do, Not Who You Are. When we think of wealth, we often think of fancy cars, big houses, and loads of money in a bank account. These can certainly be indicators of having riches, but are they wealth? Where do things like health, happiness, spirituality, and the richness of life fit in? Is a person wealthy if they have $1 billion but are unhealthy? Is a person wealthy if they live in a mansion but never leave it? I think we can all agree that neither one of those scenarios would qualify as true wealth. From there, it's also easy to see that having a fancy title or position doesn't equate to wealth either. Now, having a title, money, and a house might seem like the ultimate achievement, but without the other essential aspects, these material possessions are meaningless. True wealth lies in intangible things like happiness, rich life experiences, and mental and spiritual well-being. No amount of money or possessions can buy happiness, health, or well-being. Without those, can you truly consider yourself wealthy? These are some pretty heavy questions to ponder, but thankfully we have several tales from the past to help us consider these questions and keep the right answers in mind. One such tale that I think illustrates this really well comes from 1800s Germany and is titled Spindle, Shuttle, and Needle. Once upon a time there lived a girl who lost her father and mother when she was quite a tiny child. Her godmother lived all alone in a little cottage at the far end of the village, and there she earned her living by spinning, weaving, and sewing. The old woman took the little orphan home with her and brought her up in good, pious, industrious habits. When the girl was 15 years old, her godmother fell ill, and calling the child to her bedside, she said, "My dear daughter, I feel that my end is near. I leave you my cottage, which will, at least, shelter you, and also my spindle, my weaver's shuttle, and my needle, with which to earn your bread." Then she laid her hands on the girl's head, blessed her, and added, "Mind and be good, and then all will go well with you." With that, she closed her eyes for the last time, and when she was carried to her grave, the girl walked behind her coffin weeping bitterly, and paid her all the last honors. After this, the girl lived all alone in the little cottage. She worked hard, spinning, weaving, and sewing, and her old godmother's blessing seemed to prosper all she did. The flax seemed to spread and increase, and when she wove a carpet or a piece of linen or made a shirt, she was sure to find a customer who paid her well, so that not only did she feel no want herself, but she was able to help those who did. Now it happened that about this time the king's son was making a tour through the entire country to look out for a bride. He could not marry a poor woman, and he did not wish for a rich one. "She shall be my wife," said he, "who is at once the poorest and the richest." When he reached the village where the girl lived, he inquired who was the richest and who was the poorest woman in it. The richest was named first. The poorest, he was told, was a young girl who lived alone in a little cottage at the far end of the village. The rich girl sat at her door dressed out in all her best clothes, and when the king's son came near, she got up, went to meet him, and made him a low curtsy. He looked well at her, said nothing, but rode on further. When he reached the poor girl's house, he did not find her at her door, for she was at work in her room. The prince reined in his horse, looked in at the window through which the sun was shining brightly, and saw the girl sitting at her wheel busily spinning away. She looked up, and when she saw the king's son gazing in at her, she blushed red all over, cast down her eyes, and span on. Whether the thread was quite as even as usual, I really cannot say, but she went on spinning till the king's son had ridden off. Then she stepped to the window and opened the lattice, saying, "The room is so hot." But she looked after him as long as she could see the white plumes in his hat. Then she sat down to her work once more and span on. And as she did so, an old saying, which she had often heard her godmother repeat whilst at work, came into her head, and she began to sing. "Spindle, spindle, go and see if my love will come to me." Lo and behold, the spindle leapt from her hand and rushed out of the room. And when she had sufficiently recovered from her surprise to look after it, she saw it dancing merrily through the fields, dragging a long golden thread after it, and soon it was lost to sight. The girl, having lost her spindle, took up the shuttle, and seating herself at her loom, began to weave. Meantime, the spindle danced on, and just as it had come to the end of the golden thread, it reached the king's son. "What do I see?" he cried. "This spindle seems to wish to point out the way to me." So he turned his horse's head and rode back beside the golden thread. Meantime, the girl sat weaving and sang, "Shuttle, weave both web and woof, bring my love beneath my roof." The shuttle instantly escaped from her hand, and with one bound was out at the door. On the threshold, it began weaving the loveliest carpet that was ever seen. Roses and lilies bloomed on both sides, and in the center, a thicket seemed to grow with rabbits and hares running through it, stags and fawns peeping through the branches, whilst on the topmost boughs sat birds of brilliant plumage, and so lifelike one almost expected to hear them sing. The shuttle flew from side to side, and the carpet seemed almost to grow of itself. As the shuttle had run away, the girl sat down to sew. She took her needle and sang, "Needle, needle, stitch away, make my chamber bright and gay." And the needle promptly slipped from her fingers and flew about the room like lightning. You would have thought invisible spirits were at work, for next to no time, the table and benches were covered with green cloth, the chairs with velvet, and elegant silk curtains hung before the windows. The needle had barely put in its last stitch when the girl, glancing at the window, spied the white-plumed hat of the king's son, who was being led back by the spindle with the golden thread. He dismounted and walked over the carpet into the house, and when he entered the room, there stood the girl blushing like any rose. "You are the poorest, and yet the richest," said he. "Come with me, you shall be my bride." She said nothing, but she held out her hand. Then he kissed her and led her out, lifted her on his horse, and took her to his royal palace, where the wedding was celebrated with great rejoicings. The spindle, the shuttle, and the needle were carefully placed in the treasury, and were always held in the very highest honor. This is such a wonderful story, full of great messages that are worth keeping in mind every day. And let's get right to the first one, which is the value of good, honest work. The heroine of our story loses her parents when she's young and is raised by her godmother. When the godmother dies, the girl is left with just a place to live and a way to make a living through good, honest work. And she does it so well that not only is she able to go through her life without issues, she's able to help others as well. The key point here is that her work isn't glamorous or notable. She's not slaying dragons, moving mountains, or curing illnesses. She's simply doing a good job at something. There's no price tag that can be put on that because a job well done, no matter what it is, will reap rewards. This is the wealth of purpose. Second, the girl doesn't hoard her extra money but instead uses it to help others. We live in a world today that seems to be very self-oriented, but thinking only of yourself is never a way to wealth. It never hurts us to help others. Food, money, time, whatever we can give, be sure to give a little back. There's energy at work in the universe, God, spirit, quantum physics, whatever name you want to give it, and you're putting positive and giving energy into that will always return back to you. That's the sort of interest that always pays big dividends. But it's these last two messages in this story that I really love. The one that comes first in the story is the blessing of the godmother of the girl right before the godmother dies. She doesn't give her a magic spell or potion or beauty or riches. Nope. She gives her the gift of effort and diligence. And the girl takes that blessing and runs with it. In the end, it's her effort and diligence in the form of her spindle, shuttle, and needle that first brings the prince to her door and then brings him back after he goes. This is the wealth of a life well lived. And that brings us to the last and greatest message from this story. When the prince is seeking his bride, he makes a point of looking for a woman who is both the poorest and the richest. When he first comes upon the richest girl in the town, she presents herself to him as just that. She has money, is presumably beautiful, and entirely worthy of being a princess and future queen. Except that she's not. Because the prince knows that when he's looking for the poorest and richest woman to be his bride, it's not a princess or rich girl that he truly wants. He wants someone whose wealth is in what she does, not who she is or was born as. He finds that in our heroine, who shows that being the richest in her town is not nearly as valuable as the wealth of purpose, investing in others, and a life well lived. And in the end, the girl gets the riches too. As we wrap up this episode, let's all remember that true wealth is cultivated through our actions, not our status or titles. The story of spindle, shuttle, and needle reminds us that genuine effort and the drive to do good are what truly enrich our lives. Keep these lessons in mind as you navigate your own path. By putting in the work, helping others, and staying true to your values, you can create a life filled with true prosperity. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to tune in next time for more insights and stories on Tales for Life.